To me, sleep is the most important aspect. Sleep trumps exercise. When I have some of these go-getters who say, oh, I only got 2 hours, but I got up to work out in the gym, I say to them, I'm sorry, don't get up. You need sleep more than you need to work out. Or you're sick and you think you're going to beat yourself up in the gym and therefore you'll feel better. No. So sleep to me is the most powerful variable, and it's the hardest variable and actually most disturbing, more than obesity.
Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, how to live longer, healthier life. We are produced by Inside Tracker, your science-based guide to optimize your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Florence Comite. Joining us today is a true pioneer in precision medicine and healthy longevity, Dr. Florence Comite. A graduate of Yale School of Medicine, spent 25 years on the faculty at Yale with a rare triple appointment in endocrinology, internal medicine and pediatrics, and reproductive endocrinology, gynecology, and andrology. In 1992, she founded and directed the first women's health clinic at Yale. Later, in 2005, she launches the Comite Center for Precision Medicine and Healthy Longevity in New York City, and subsequently expanded her practice across California and Florida. Dr. Comite is internationally known for her innovative N-of-1 approach to healthcare, leveraging individual data, including genomic, biomarker, lifestyle, and wearable data, to detect, predict, and delay aging-related disorders, from diabetes to cardiovascular diseases. Her work serves as a living laboratory of precision medicine, guiding personalized intervention tailored to each individual unique metabolic blueprint. Welcome, Florence.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited, Gil. And of course, Inside Tracker has been around a while. I remember reading all about it and actually testing it myself with other people here at the center.
Oh, that's exciting to know. And before we dive into the interview, I just would like to ask our audience, if you are enjoying Longevity by Design, please can follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, so you don't miss any further episode. I would like to start with asking you a question about your work at NIH and later practicing precision medicine and endocrinology for decades. What led you to shift away from conventional medicine toward a more proactive style medicine practice?
That's a great question. And I actually had 3 epiphanies all within a very short period of time back when I was at Yale. And at the time, I had initiated work in women's health, which is the first of its center in the world, really. There was no one else doing this work, this kind of work. And I was in all 3 departments, and every Friday we used to have journal club. So, journal club is when you present papers, you use the data and the science to actually present a point of view that's unique and teach everyone in the group. And so from professors to students, it's a lot of fun. And at the time, I remember thinking, why does everything start going south in your 30s? Why do metabolic and hormonal decline begin? Heart attacks happen in men late in the 30s, fertility issues in women, truncal weight gain, difficulty putting on muscle, and all compared to the 20s where you can burn the candle at both ends and still do great. And more obvious symptoms come out in the 40s and beyond. And so that was one big epiphany. It all comes together. How come? And then I was starting to look at lab data very critically because I would draw a lot of tests. I had multi-center trials and my own trials, INDs. I had as well patents that I had worked with peptides and hormones in children, women, and men. And I realized that when I looked at this data, I could see emerging disease, even if people didn't have symptoms. And they use the fact that in their 30s, you're starting a family, you're working, it's very hard to get in the gym, it's very hard to eat right and get enough sleep. But even those individuals that focused on themselves noticed a decline. And so to me, when I looked at it after beginning my work early at NIH, I worked in children with early advanced puberty called precocious puberty. And I knew the numbers for each decade of life. And then later on in men, women, and children, I was using GnRH analogs to treat conditions like endometriosis or fibroids, growth issues, ovarian cysts. And that led me to have an insider view of how the body changes hormonally throughout the system. So I noticed that I could connect the dots. I thought every doctor could, to the extent they did work, connect the dots across systems. And I said, this little kid is going to be a diabetic, and this person already has signs of heart disease. Why aren't we doing something about it? Why do we wait until they have symptoms before we jump all over it, which is the way conventional medicine treats people? Even prevention isn't enough to me. It has to be proactive. So I started digging into all the different issues: sleep, the way we make choices about food or exercise, stress, cortisol, all of that, and how does that impact these numbers? And then finally, what capped it off and what led me down the path of N of one, meaning I thought we did great with evidence in medicine, but that evidence doesn't go far enough to me, because the evidence tends to be a one-size-fits-all with what we call regression to the mean. So everybody is average, whereas none of us are average. And I knew that instinctively, being an identical twin. So my identical twin and I are different. There are aspects of my understanding very early that epigenetic expression of genes and the way the switches go on and off can be different, even in two individuals that came from the same egg and sperm. So my twin and I were definitely tested. We were both at Yale Medical School together. And I recognized that in order to help people, I felt we had to drill down the evidence into the individual and look at risk-benefit through the lens of clinical research. And that's how I began to shift my focus from reactive to proactive.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I started InstaTracker in 2009, and you started a few years earlier, 2005. And I think that we are thinking very alike, that basically you cannot treat everyone the same. Everyone is unique, and we need to understand what's happening inside your body. And your example of your sister is a great example, that even identical twins, that all the genetic is the same, you have so many differences. And now there are some hypotheses that saying that maybe 80% of our health and the longevity is actually not by the genetics, but more about our environment and how we behave and how do we eat and how do we exercise. So there is so much that we can influence just by changing our lifestyle. And I commit you to of doing that so early. And I had a special question about your sister, but it sounds like we already covered it. It's, by the way, it's very exciting that and showing how smart is your family, that both you and your sister, and now I know that both of you studied at Yale together at medical school.
Yeah, and then we have a brother who started life younger than us, but we told him we were younger that he's going to be older when we get older. So now we call him our older brother, but he too is a doctor. Most of my family are doctors. There is a lawyer and a financial person here and there, but there's a lot of dermatologists and plastic surgeons. So I get called the real doctor in the family because I went in deep. And even though my twin and I did start at that single embryo, from the moment you separate in utero, which is something I always thought about from an epigenetic point of view and how genes express, we express genetic variants. Like, for example, as a basic thing, I could live on sushi and sashimi, and she can't stand fish. She's an amazing gardener, and I basically kill plants. So applying a sort of one-size-fits-all solution in evidence-driven medicine doesn't really account for differences in each individual. And that was crucial for me to discern. And I think a good doctor in front of a patient knows how to be specific. But I wanted to think about it as a researcher. How do you look at risk-benefit and take evidence? Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. But just because some of these agents do certain things to certain people doesn't mean that they'll do the same thing to everyone. And I think we now know that for a fact. In fact, Nicholas Stork, who worked with Craig Venter, who was one of the first to describe his entire genome to the cost of billions, he describes it's time for N of one medicine. Because even the most popular drugs don't work the same way in people, or applying Coumadin, for example, in situations where you need blood thinners Some people need to have a very little bit to get the blood thin, and other people need massive amounts of it. And we've all heard as doctors, patients coming in and saying, oh, a little bit goes a long way for me, so just give me a small amount of the medicine. And other people saying, oh, no, I need massive amounts to see any effect. And of course, we now know that drills down to the genetic variants and the way we metabolize, absorb, and use any agent from food, even exercise and lifestyle. So in a way, lifestyle and habits are integrated with genes. And I think it goes back and forth. I actually emphasize that fact that you can do everything perfectly and still get disease because it's about your propensity for disease. That's where I hope to intervene.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And today we have more and more polygenic scores that basically showing whether you are more endurance than strength, or whether
Exactly.
you are a morning person or evening person, or whether you have a higher risk to be gluten intolerant, going to high glucose risk or high cholesterol risk. So there is so much data. And unfortunately, nobody in the traditional medicine is using it right now. Somehow, and as you said, Greg Venter, they sequenced the human genome in the year 2000 or so. We are now in 2025. We have so much data, and I don't see any primary care physician using this data, which is outrageous for me.
I agree. It's application of it that's very complex. And that's what I set out to do. In fact, I created a protocol to collect N of 1 data prospectively and be able to publish it retrospectively. And I think I'm the only one who set it up in an organized enough fashion to be able to use the data instead of just trial and error. I was taught by a very brilliant man called Lynn Lorio at NIH. He was my mentor in the field of reproductive endocrinology and endocrine of every shape and color. So I was lucky I had very unique training. But just like some of us can fast, intermittently fast, for me, it's very easy to do that. For other people, it's dangerous, or they overdo it and they get down to glucoses of 40, which is bad for their brain and heart. And yet they're thinking they're saving their heart and brain because they're fasting, whereas it's actually going to hurt them. So applying what one person or another person does, particularly some of our influencers, you can't always take what they do and apply it to everybody else. And that's where, to me, where the rubber meets the road. You have to know the patient, and then you have to look at interventions that are targeted and personalized for them, but then follow it through to the future. So what are the patterns? What are the prototypes? And that's what I ended up doing over the last 20 years.
Yeah, no, and that's exciting. So tell us a bit about the N of 1 experiment or precision medicine that you are doing. So let's assume that a new patient coming to you. What are you doing in order to design the N of 1 experiment that you'll put in on?
So that's a great question. And I feel very lucky because of Lynn Lorio and my other mentors at NIH and Yale. I actually could think through a protocol, which I created. I had tons of IND protocols. I brought drugs to market and in patents. So I was familiar with the aspect. But here I was, people were laughing at me at the time when I said N of 1. How could you do that? It doesn't make sense. And I had a lot to learn. But I designed it so that everybody starts at the same baseline, a pretty thorough analysis of about 125 to 130 biomarkers, or as we call them in part, labs. I think biomarkers go beyond just laboratory, and biological markers to me are your family history, the way you live life, how you sleep. Do you get more deep sleep or REM sleep? Do you get any deep sleep at all? How's your exercise? What about stress? All of those factors were really important. So we start everybody at a same baseline where we're getting the data, because I knew that data alone, from looking at numbers early on, as I told you, that epiphany, and connecting the dots, would tell me, do you have insulin resistance? How about your uric acid? Are you at risk for gout? And through doing that, I could see where the genetic influences were and where the lifestyle influences are, and begin to change. So first we draw that. In the present and today, in the last at least a half a dozen, maybe more years, whenever the continuous glucose monitor became available, I jumped on it. Luckily, as an endocrinologist, I got access to it right at the get-go before it went direct to the patient. And I was able to uniformly show people, and now anybody who starts with me gets a continuous glucose monitor before they even meet me. They get these blood tests, and they also get an in-body to look at their body composition. Once we have that data, we can decide where you're starting, and we might end up doing even a deeper dive. For example, if your lipids, the standard lipids, HDL, LDL, total cholesterol, if they are off in some way and the pattern isn't optimal, we would dig deeper to look at lipoprotein little a or ApoB, the ratios in other ways, and look at HDL. Do you actually have alpha 1 and alpha 2? So for me, I was actually acting it out with my patients. Like I needed to know everything about them to begin with. And I grew to understand how they lived life and the choices they made. So in effect, I almost became a family doctor practicing precision medicine. And in the end, that's the way the patients looked at what we did. It's almost a new style of family medicine. That process, unlike the way we practice in medicine, which is you present with some abnormality and you then hope with your chief complaint to have somebody deal with it. So you narrow the scope and you're just looking at whatever the symptoms are, right? And then you're approaching it. For me, I pulled back and I said, I have to know the human being in order to be able, from the inside out, in order to be able to apply change. We also do VO2 testing. So we looked at VO2 max from the get-go to look at endurance, because to me, that is one of the most important predictors of future health. I'm sure you know the data from the New England Journal and the Mayo, where they looked at 10 to 15,000 individuals and showed, independent of gender and cardiometabolic status, if you improve your VO2 max and hence your metabolic equivalent, you reduce your risk of morbidity or mortality, so disease and death, by 12% over 10 years, with an increase of 3 points for the VO2 max, 1 metabolic equivalent. And so all of that feeds the decisions we make in sync with the particular human being and what interventions make sense, from habits and lifestyle to sleep, which is also critical, all of those sleep, food, exercise, stressors, to supplements and medication. And that's how I initiate somebody into the program that we run.
Yeah, no, that's great, because usually when you go to your clinician, is looking at, let's say, 18 or so blood biomarkers. If everything is okay, he kick you out from those. You're good, come in a few years. And if something is bad, let's start with a drug. And what you're doing here, let's start with an holistic view. Let's look at you holistically and see all the issue that you have, even if they are small. Let's then build a plan, and a lot of the plan is basically, as you said, lifestyle and some supplement. And if we need, we'll go to drug, but drug is not the default, and we shouldn't bombard you with drugs. And I think that's the right way. And as you said before, it's a prevention and not basically treatment disease when the disease is there. Let's prevent it and let's allow us to
Exactly,
live better
because
longer.
it's already emerging. Like it's under the
Yeah.
surface, but it hasn't popped through yet. And so you can
Yeah.
even see it in little children. I've been asked to sometimes consult because of my work in pediatric endocrine and gene age analogs and growth and development. And I would not know much about the family history. It was a 9, 10, or 11-year-old. And I could already see signs, because in young children, they should have a great body, not be too heavy or too thin, because it's a natural physiological thing for them to eat like the rest of their family, to run around. And when they're not, you can see it early on. But the time it begins to really have an impact and begin to accumulate is in our 30s, when hormones begin to shift and our lifestyle changes. So by starting with that focus, because most of us want to do less to get more, and you can do that. So I'm in agreement with your statement that it is important to look at lifestyle, but it can't be the whole answer. That's absolutely true.
Yeah. Yeah, and the anecdote that I'm seeing with our users is that, for example, you said, let's go deep. And if you look, if we focus for a second on glucose A1C, there is another marker that's called insulin. And if you see that the insulin started to go up, that's basically the first sign of pre-diabetes. And most of the clinicians are not even looking at it.
Because they don't even draw insulin, and they don't draw testosterone, which is another the key factors to
absolutely
our testosterone and insulin. And if you think about hemoglobin A1C, it's in a way it's meaningless because it's average. And when they say an average, like you know the Ozempic ad, the average is less than 7, but you're still a diabetic, because by definition, 6.5 is diabetes, 5.7, and it only goes one way unless you intervene. We have not had one person in the thousands I've seen in years become a diabetic. If anything, we reverse diabetes, even when people, and many people do start with insulin resistance. And the reason for that, I believe, is Darwinian, that survival from ancestors like cavemen or the Irish famine or the Holocaust. From that point on, we had to select genes that allowed us to put on fat to survive lean times. So the selection process, if you look at Darwin, was what genes are going to make it. Nowadays, we have access to food 24/7, not always great food. Golden arches of McDonald's are everywhere, right? And so we are selecting for people who get disease and get sick. And you have to actively look at ways to stop that from happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I see all those fast food chain as the new cigarette in a way. They are the damage that they are making is amazing, and somehow we are. Hopefully, in 20 years, we will realize that's the case, and we will somehow eradicate it. But right now, it's a big problem.
It is. It's hard to select good food, and I don't believe in deprivation. I believe in moderation. I believe with an understanding of your body. In today's world, which I'll know we'll get into, with wearables, there's so much an individual can do if they only understood the drivers, if we could only give them that information. And that's my biggest dream, to actually, and I thought about it 20 years ago when the internet intersected with genetics. If we can do bricks and clicks and give people the understanding to implement it, we can't see all these people to take care of them, but they could do it for themselves with guidance, with wisdom and interpretation. And that's where AI is today.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I see another problem because in a way we are doing it at InstaTracker and at other digital health solution. But even when people know that they shouldn't eat McDonald's and they should exercise and they should sleep well, still they're not doing it. So I'm not sure that the knowledge is the only problem. I think that you need somehow to use behavioral science tools that will make them addicted to that and make them understand. So I think that we have another layer that we haven't penetrated yet. Nobody penetrated. How can we communicate it well enough for everyone, not to the type A people like you and me and your client and my client. I'm talking about the millions of people that are going to McDonald's every day. How can we tell them, it's okay to go to McDonald's once a week or once a month, but you cannot go there every day. And I don't know, nobody is doing it.
Gil, I think that's slowly evolving. I think that's where the focus in today's world on longevity and health has come about, because folks, I think COVID was the big leveler. I think people realized that with COVID, if you were not healthy, you were at even higher risk. And we know that. We know that diabetics were admitted 8 times as often as people who weren't. And if you were pre-diabetics, I've had some doctor colleagues on respirators who didn't come through COVID too well. I do think the wearables and the penetrance of the watch or Aura or Whoop, any of these devices that put it right in front of you, because I've had athletes, and as you said, a lot of my patients are upset, OCD, and focused like a laser on how to keep their health. And they are shocked when they see what happens when they don't eat well, because they will make choices. And I think as that penetrates, and I liken it to banking, because in today's world, we don't go to banks anymore. We all manage money virtually, just about. You don't have to go to a bank. And this applies to everyone. And I think as information becomes more democratized and scaled, and that is my biggest dream, to make it scalable in sound bites, in baby steps, so that people could understand. Because now you can go and get Ella or one of the over-the-counter continuous glucose monitors, and you can actually see what does happen. I've seen changes in people as quickly as a week. People who insist their diet is perfect. Let's say they're Asian and they use rusk on top of a coffee, and their sugar goes sky high, or even with a banana. So then they make judicious decisions about how best to decide what would be right for them. Not necessarily their best friends, but them. It then goes down into their family and their children, and how they make those choices. They recognize that is going to be inherited as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would like to switch gear for a second to aging and the disease related to aging. In your opinion, what is the biggest driver of chronic diseases of aging?
So I have to say that the common thinking is that 35% genetics and 65% lifestyle. The genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. I agree with that to a little bit, but I really think that the propensity to disease rests in our DNA and genetics, and we can modify expression, epigenetic expression of disease by, for example, reducing inflammation. In my family, there's a history of breast cancer in many of my aunts and also my first cousins. I had 27 first girl cousins, and we're a big family, several doctors and other professionals. And it isn't for BRCA. We have a high incidence of inflammation. And by reducing inflammation in the environment, for example, when I first started, my mercury was 38, which is very high because I could, as I said, I could live on sushi and sashimi. And I drove it down to less than 4. I still eat sushi and sashimi. I'm just more selective. I don't always get ahi tuna or the fish that have a high mercury content.
Yeah.
So to me, genetic variants really drive the system. And when you know your genetic makeup, even in a small degree, for example, MTHFR, one of those genetic variants, which makes it impossible to metabolize, methylate rather, B vitamins, can lead to sudden sensory neural hearing loss. It can lead, which is hearing loss per se, triggered by a virus. It can lead to deep vein thrombosis. I picked up that in patients, heart attack, stroke, emboli. And so I think understanding the propensity and the shortcut, the most valuable piece of information, if you're lucky enough to know your biological family, is family history. By understanding your family history, those are genes that express themselves. That is a great first start to deciding the choices that you're going to make and what interventions make the most sense for you.
As a Longevity by Design podcast listener, you understand the value of improving your health for today and for all the years ahead. And if you want to live your healthiest, longest life possible, you need to understand what's going on inside. At Inside Tracker, we take a personalized approach to Healthspan optimization that eliminates guesswork from your wellness plan. Inside Tracker analyzes blood biomarker and DNA data, along with physiomarker data from fitness trackers like Oura Ring, to deliver personalized food, supplement, lifestyle, and exercise recommendations that allow you to take control and improve your health span. And for a limited time, Longevity by Design listeners can get 20% off at the Inside Tracker store. So if you're ready to receive a personal health analysis and data-driven wellness plan to optimize your body for the long haul, then it's time to start inside. Visit insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today. That's insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And talking about intervention, so in your practice, what lifestyle intervention do you find move the needle the most for your patient?
That's I'm going to divide that into two halves. Which do I find moves the needle the most and which is actually applicable but takes a long time? So to me, sleep is the most important aspect. Sleep trumps exercise. When I have some of these go-getters who say, oh, I only got 2 hours, but I got up to work out in the gym. I say to them, I'm sorry, don't get up. You need sleep more than you need to work out. Or you're sick and you think you're going to beat yourself up in the gym and therefore you'll feel better. No. So sleep to me is the most powerful variable and it's the hardest variable and actually most disturbing more than obesity. I think obesity, particularly in the miracle GLP-1s now, Ozempic and Mounjaro and all the others, I think that we can do a lot. I see that agent and I've been using them for 20 years. Again, as an endocrinologist, I was lucky to start with Byetta, which was one of the first that you had to take before a meal. So it wasn't weekly, but it was daily, and that will make a difference. So the biggest thing that changes the needle is the way people understand their sugar and their insulin and their hormones. And that makes a difference in terms of choices they make for lifestyle. Whereas sleep probably has the most endurance in terms of really long-term and short-term, how you feel, how you make choices, because I'm sure that when you have too little sleep, your body actually craves carbohydrates. You make a hormone called ghrelin, and it causes you to want bad stuff like donuts and other things. You don't understand why, but you drive to it. So by overcoming what I think of as social jet lag, where we all feel like we have to keep up and keep going and not get enough sleep, that is probably changing the needle the most. But it's not the most low hanging, like in terms of where people usually can start. It's very hard for most people to make those changes because they're used to living life a certain way. And it's hard for them to make decisions that get them quality sleep, not just a lot of sleep, but quality sleep with deep sleep and REM as well.
Yeah. And okay, so what would you do with them? Like you will train them, you will put them on Oura Ring and then give them some analysis. How do you tackle it? And I agree with you. It's not easy, for example, to change the deep and REM because it's not like I can decide when I'm going to sleep and when I will wake up, but I cannot decide when I will wake up in the middle of the night.
Right.
And I cannot decide how many REM or deep sleep percentage I will receive. So what do you do to make it better?
So there's a lot of variables. So you're absolutely right. First, we start with a way to monitor sleep. If we find somebody has sleep apnea, that is the default. I used to hate sending people to sleep labs only to get an answer that they have apnea because that's what you're looking for. That's the only thing we can do something about or try. And
Yeah.
most people hate CPAP. So luckily there are some good other interventions like Inspire that really make a difference to help with sleeping through the night. But there are ways to fix sleep and stop people from waking up at night and help people get to bed earlier and stay in bed with quality. And they range from taking certain supplements that could make a difference, things like magnesium, treonate, which affects the brain. Take a bath with Epsom salts, right? And in the old days, maybe eat turkey or warm milk so you get serotonin, right? We use trazodone when I see that sleep is really disruptive, and particularly as people, as men and women go through perimenopause and periandropause, which can begin in the 30s, but definitely in the 40s, their sleep is disruptive at night because neuroendocrine modulators change as hormones change. And that's the biggest driver. Because in our 30s, as testosterone falls, our system is beginning to shift. And it's one of the biggest drivers of aging, biological aging. So we can do cold, for example. I have found that for some people, being able to change the temperature in their room and get used to that, a weighted blankets. I don't know if you've had familiarity with 8 sleep or some of
Yeah.
the other, and that has made a difference. I've been able to help people reduce their risk of poor sleep quality by looking at those variables. It takes a lot of work. You have to drill in. And I know that there are companies now doing this. There's a company that you might want to interview the founder too, Chopra, Dr. Chopra, Sahil Chopra. It's called Empower Sleep. And I'm excited about the potential to work with them because we can only take it so far, but I am not an expert, a deep expert in sleep. I can
Yeah.
do a lot to jumpstart people, but then I look for expertise beyond that. And that's where I think if we can all come together, we can get it figured out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm working on my sleep, I would say, in the last few years, and everyone laugh at me, but every night at 10 p.m., I'm going to sleep, and I'm not drinking alcohol at all.
Oh,
And
that's the
and not,
easiest fix. Yeah,
yeah,
because if
yeah,
you use a CGM and you drink alcohol, your sleep is absolutely going to be disrupted. That's it.
yeah, I've seen it several times. When I drink even one cup of alcohol, my sleep is,
And if you eat or drink within 2 hours of sleep, so
yeah,
you should stop
yeah,
by 8 o'clock. There's
yeah,
also
yeah,
peptides that I've seen to be very useful. Miparelin and CJC 1295. Again, my field was peptides and hormones. So I was lucky to
yeah,
be able to go very deep in that and improve deep sleep with people. Because that to me,
yeah.
if you get 2 hours of sleep and half of it is deep sleep, you're okay. It's not good long term, but you can function. Whereas if you get
Yeah.
9 hours of sleep and only 9 minutes of deep sleep, you're not going to do well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I'm trying to say, also worked on the temperature of the room, as you said, and I found out that in the summer, it's the room temperature for me should be 70 degree. In the winter, it should be 67 degree.
Wow.
And depending on the blanket that I'm using and all of that, so I'm like a machine right now, know exactly, and I'm optimizing, and I'm optimizing my sleep. But it took me a few years and a lot of hard work, and I'm not sure that, again, not a type A person will work so hard on that and will.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's true because we are like, I feel like I go into withdrawal when I don't wear a CGM, which I have on my arm right now. And I've been wearing it nonstop for years. And like you, I had insulin resistance, but I have very low hemoglobin A1C. My hemoglobin A1C was always under 5, but I have insulin resistance and my insulin fasting was high. Even Quest was wrong. I don't know if you read the regular Quest reports, but it would say that you can have an insulin of 17 when you wake up in the morning and you're fine. It's completely untrue. You should have no
Yeah.
insulin 3 hours after you eat. But these tips that you have access to, that I have access to, that I've tested, can be simplified. And that's what I think we can share virtually with folks going forward. To take
Yeah.
what I'm doing now is I'm taking the proprietary data set, which I already tested in an app, and I could do virtual medicine that way. But now I want to automate it. So it's like pushing a button instead of sounding like a recording, and giving
Yeah.
people the choices and how they go down the list to figure out what's good for them. So for me, my sugar has always been fairly low because I'm a grazer. I eat pretty well. I have a big sweet tooth. I could live on ice cream, but I also like dark chocolate. And it took me a couple of years, but if you stick with it and you don't make yourself crazy from it, but you just recognize it's a learning curve of your own body, and then your body begins to
Yeah.
shift. So those are the kind of tips that regular folks don't have access to, but many of them
Yeah.
want it. So I think access and scale are going to be very important.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And it's hard to do those optimization. And what we discussed so far is literally an N of one experiment that we are doing. We are playing with the amount of alcohol and the temperature in the room and the time of bed. And then a scientist like us can do that, but someone that is not as scientific or as educated in science need help. And the help can be a clinician like yourself, or an app, or some digital tool that can help them. And definitely that's something that we should go to. I have a follow-up question about the sleep that you mentioned, and you discussed the perimenopausal and menopausal. I'm wondering, what is your opinion of HRT, and should women do that or not? There is always, when I'm talking about that, there is a different reaction from the
So
interviewee.
I feel very fortunate because I had very deep training and also application. I used GnRH analogs in men and women, and particularly for issues that turn the system on and off, both menopause and andropause. And I believe very strongly in hormonal optimization. I think we do people a disservice. When they did the Women's Health Initiative trial, it threw everybody off. Now, look, I never used Premarin and Provera. They were not good estrogens and progesterones. They were not good for the system. Premarin came from the urine of pregnant mares with a lot of other stuff in there that is great for horses, but not for human women. And progesterone, the version of it, Depo-Provera, was also not a good drug. But if you purified it, and it took a long time, it was the Women's Health Initiative trial that threw everybody. And I basically wasn't surprised because I had started women's health in 1992. So that trial was in 2000 to 2002, and it was very unbalanced. So everybody's confused about it. And unfortunately, there's not great teaching in this area, although there are great papers for men and women. To this day, a lot of conventional medical doctors don't think men hormones change. And I can tell you for a fact that they change, and you can't get more testosterone by working out harder or by taking supplements. And I've tried all the supplements. Fenugi, there's so many, they don't change your testosterone. And so I'm a strong believer that hormones optimize the system, and that particularly testosterone, used judiciously and physiologically, meaning not the way it's used in gym rats, where they use doses that may be 1,000 times physiological doses, or with growth hormone that can grow the heart and other organs. And many of them have rupture of their heart at the age of 50. And several of them, if you look in the gyms, a lot of times you'll wonder if someone's in such good shape, why do they have a pot belly? Well, they're using these hormones and growing their organs, in effect, damaging themselves. So their liver is too big, their spleen is too big, and that is not the way to do it. It's in excess. It's like too little is not good and too much is not good. And you have to find that fine line of what is just right, and err on the side of risk benefit, where you don't do excessive and you do it in a way that keeps people on the right vein, so that as they head into their future health trajectory becomes optimal, and they don't have to get diabetes, and they don't have to have a heart attack, and they don't have to get Alzheimer's or cancer.
Yeah. No, and we are seeing, you spoke about testosterone, and we definitely see in our database a lot of males that even didn't know that they have low testosterone because nobody is testing it.
Right.
And menopause transition is so important for women. And again, there is not, most of the clinicians don't test the progesterone and estrogen because they, oh, it's a menopause. Why should we test it? So I think that it started by you cannot manage what you not measure. And then when you measure it, you need to manage it well. And I agree with you. Most of those, especially those hormones, are coming in a U shape. So you need to find
Right.
where is the right place to have it. Too much is not good, but too little is not good. And
Exactly.
we need to find it, and it's not easy.
What I typically say is that, and I'm lucky because I know every stage of the cycle and how men and women age. In women, we can't be Mother Nature. Our ovaries, we hit a wall at 50, and we start losing eggs in our ovaries that are important for the cycle at birth. At birth, little girls have fewer eggs than they did in utero. And by the time we hit on an average age of 50, but could it be as early as 38 and as late as 58? So it's a 20-year span. And I've even seen that in the same family. We women can't make these hormones from our ovaries anymore. And we start out life with very little testosterone compared to men. It's why women tend to get osteoporosis 10 years before men and collies fracture the wrist, they shrink their hips later on. Men get it too. 25% of men and women by the time we're older have osteoporosis. It's ubiquitous in that way. But even with men, their hormonal changes are I've reported this in Endocrine Society in 2013. It's in my first book called Keep It Up, because I wrote it for men because there was nothing there for men. And I showed that in men who, when you compare men to women, for example, the difference is men make 20 million sperm per drop of semen. We women make 1 egg a month, generally, right? Except if we're having twins or fraternal twins, and maybe there's 2 eggs.
Yeah.
But that changes with time, and men's hormones dip, and it's why men get weak and fragile, just like women do. It's just slanted differently. Men start with heart disease more 10 years earlier than women in their 30s. We women tend to see more in the 40s and later. We start with osteoporosis in our 40s. Men start a little bit later. And so hormones have a huge impact in the way we live life and making those decisions. But we can't reproduce, right, in today's world, what Mother Nature does, finely tuning it. So we have to look at integrated levels over time. So that's the way I practice, where I say, okay, I'm going to give just enough to make a difference in health, but not too much and not too little. And then we monitor folks as well, which is not hard to do.
Yeah. And I see it in a way that for women, there is a cliff. At the menopause, you have a big drop of those hormones. For males, it's going down literally. You can see it even from the age of 30, as you said. It's starting to drop and drop. So it's more gradual, but there is a drop, and it's a gradual drop, and the male should know it and take care of it.
But it's not just testosterone. There are many other hormones, and we tend to focus on testosterone because one of the reasons I wrote the book, it was published by Rodale called Keep It Up, and I'm happy to send you a copy. It was 2013, and the subtext was the power of precision medicine to reverse low T and improve your life. And is that in men, there's secondary failure. So in men, what happens is your body, when you're younger, in your 20s, and your testosterone falls because you're drinking too much or not getting enough sleep or you're tired, your brain recognizes it and says, hey, come on, wake up, let's make more. And your brain tells your testicles, hey, we have to make more. And so it's secondary failure that happens as men age. The brain does not recognize that there's too little circulating testosterone. It isn't the testes failing, because testes can work into your 90s, maybe even beyond. And men have fathered children. They reduce the testosterone, but you can't shut it down completely. So the testes are not like the ovaries, like you said, it's a cliff. But 5, 10, 15 years before the cliff in women, your system is already changing. That's why it's called perimenopause. And in men, I call it periandropause, but it can last for decades in men. I use actually human chorionic gonadotropin in men because it's a simple peptide that stimulates the ovaries directly. It's like a hormone that comes from the brain called LH, and it tells your testes to make testosterone effectively. So I have a different view on how hormones should be and why they contribute to your health span and why they're so essential.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking about longevity, Are there a myths about longevity that frustrated you, mostly as a physician, or everything that is floating around in the social media is true?
So I think the myths about longevity maybe is, to me, that if you do everything right, you're going to be fine. I've seen too many people who think they're following the Brian Johnson way of living life, or the Huberman, who's very prominent and he's an excellent scientist. But the thing is, you can't apply what other people do necessarily to yourself. That's where the N of one comes along, and understanding what's right for each person, because you can be an athlete, you can be a competitor and do great, but your body is going to age, and you need to know the specifics of what to do to redirect that so you can protect your health span for the rest of your life. And in today's world, it's a very exciting time, and it's an arena that everybody's jumping into. But I think there's not enough wisdom in it yet. There's not enough of an understanding of how you apply it as an individual, because you may not be as I am. You may not be like your brother. You may not be like your best friend. And so understanding what to cherry pick and how to apply to yourself is, I think, one of the biggest myths. It isn't taking a supplement stack or taking peptides or and throwing things at everybody. It's about being selective about your makeup and what your prototype is, to be able to stop things from progressing and keep your health for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it's going back to the point that we discussed before, the motive that you believe in, the end of one experiment. So, yeah, if you want to follow something that Andrew Huberman is saying, and I agree with you, he's a very good scientist, try it and see whether it's working for you or not. It's not like assembly line of a car that if you do something for car number one, the same will happen for car number 500,000. Here we are unique, we are complex, so test it and see. It's the example of a temperature of a sleeping temperature. For me is a 67. For you, it might be 72. So everyone needs to try, and that's the end of one experiment. It's not easy, but that's the way to do it. And by the way, the set point of the temperature for me is good for today, but maybe tomorrow it will change.
Yeah, as your body changes, exactly. And that's another thing to be aware of. We've had patients who've had to do things one certain way, but as they adapt and they get healthier and healthier, they can alter and change what they need to do. But we've also had patients in perfect shape from the inside out, where they have a perfect body comp, they have muscle, not a lot of fat, no visceral fat. They try to eat right, they work out, and yet they present with Alzheimer's at 60, or they have heart attacks and they have terrible heart disease, and they're shocked. They're shocked because they feel like they put all their energies into it. So the answers aren't always obvious. On the other hand, I'm still excited about it, because even people who don't know their biological inheritance, from the numbers, from the data, which to me is what precision medicine is. It's not just personalizing medicine. It's about the data. That's why I call it precision, because to a doctor, a good doctor and a clinician, you always want to do your best for each patient. But applying it with the understanding and data is what, to me, marries to personalization, so that you can make a real difference. And that's what's missing in longevity today, I think.
I agree. And I think that the point that you raised about genetics is a good one. Everyone was born with his own genetics, and not everyone can live to 122. There is only one lady that lived to that age. And what you can do is I like the analogy of the card in Vegas. So take the card that you got and now play them the best that you can, and play them the best is the lifestyle.
Exactly.
And maybe you only live to 67, but if you will play the card, you live well to 67.
Let's hope. To me, 67, you're still a baby. Let's hope it's more like 97. And then
I agree. But what I'm saying, I always have the people that I'm talking with and saying, oh, I know there is a someone that I know that he was a marathon runner and he died at the age of 40. So my response to those people is, this guy is unfortunate. He did what he could, but he had a very bad gene. And that's it. But most of us don't have a bad gene. So try to do the best.
And you can hedge your bets. Like, for example, I have a patient who's well-known and associated with me. He's a startup lawyer at Fenwick West, and well-known, Michael Esquivel. And he came to me because he couldn't get an appointment at Stanford, and he was falling off the Peloton, and he couldn't drive, and he was dizzy. In the end, we diagnosed vestibular migraines. I usually see people who don't have a specific presentation, But in his case, he wanted the full court press. And in working him up and getting his story, we turned up that he has Lynch syndrome and very high risk of certain cancers, breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. So starting in his 40s, he's going to get screened. So there are ways to hedge your bet beyond that. The 40-year-old who died is like Arthur Fix-It, the tennis player and the runner, people who don't want to think they're living life perfectly, but maybe they have a widowmaker's blockage in their heart. And if you can look at their levels and even do the simple baseline kind of testing of lipids, know the family history, you can apply that. I've seen 33-year-olds who number-wise look like they're in their 50s. And then you get their stories about, in fact, Ashkenazi Jews and certain sects of Asians have a familial tendency that in medical school, I learned that if your grandparents and your parents all had heart disease early, heart attack or stroke, it goes down into each generation, but never understood why. And now we know there are genes that dictate that, and that you can see it in metabolism and in the numbers, and you can fix it so that death doesn't have to come early. So that's where I see the future going, but it's going to take a while to get there.
Yeah, no, and it's going back to genetics. And we sequenced the human genome 25 years ago, but we still have a lot to learn, and we're still learning every day.
I worked with Illumina in 2016, and I ran Understand Your Genome, where we did whole genome sequencing. And as a result, we really took care of some people, but mainly it's inheritance and what can you pass on and what's the risk, for example, of cystic fibrosis and all of that. How do you select? Nowadays, I'm working with another group that allows me to look at 1,700 gene variants. And really, as I mentioned, the fine tuning of inflammation, that's where I found out, for example, that the reason breast cancer is so prevalent in my family is that we have the genes that increase inflammation. It's very hard for me to detox. So having a mercury level of 38, whereas my sister's was undetectable, puts me at higher risk in some ways. I found out macular degeneration, my father had it, other eye conditions. And you'd think the opposite, but you need a lot of vitamin D, which is, by the way, a fat steroid hormone. It's not even just a vitamin. And you need to contain the amount of vitamin A. Who would think that? Vitamin A is supposed to be good for the eyes, right? I can live on tomatoes and carrots and every red kind of fruit there is that has vitamin A. And now I watch how much vitamin A, because I don't want macular degeneration. We saved my father's eyesight with laser at 90. But why even think about it? So there are choices, sophisticated choices that I think are going to be available to folks if they just had some baseline rules, some baby steps where they can implement it in their own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned before that you wrote a book, and I know that right now you're writing another book, and it should come in less than a year. So can you give us a sneak peek of what are you writing about, and why are you writing another book?
Okay. First of all, I've wanted to write 2 more books since 2013, and I've just been too busy. So that was one of the hardest things I did, to be honest. I was up at night late, and I didn't get enough sleep, and that was really hard. But I promised myself that I would make this information available. And you probably know, as a researcher and scientist as well, that a lot of us who do research, it's very hard to share all the details. And a lot of times when we publish, even in the New England Journal or JAMA, we're only getting a snippet of what we actually learned, because it's by living it that we understand it, and by doing that hands-on research, which I'm sure you at Inside Tracker have a lot of information that's very hard to define. So what we're doing in the book is actually designing it so people can see themselves in it, by saying the episode of what I told you, that early heart disease can happen if it runs in your family. This is what you should look for, and this is what you should do, by describing prototypes. So people can look for themselves in these pictures of patients, real patients, because I have a very hard time making up stories. I cannot. As a scientist, it's impossible for me. So I tell real stories of real patients and being able to see yourself. So we are defining it as 7 different prototypes, with an emphasis on all aspects. Of course, andropause in men and menopause in women are described in there, cardiometabolic disease, heart attack and stroke. All of that is going to be part and parcel, and none of us are a pure prototype. I actually like to think about the book. Have you ever heard of the book Color Me Beautiful? So it was a book that probably is 15, maybe 20 years old. And it basically based your coloring on what the best clothes for you to wear. What are the colors? Are you winter, spring, summer, or fall? And by knowing what you fit into, you can decide what are the colors that enhance your look, how you. I feel that if people can figure out what's the prototype they're most like, that would be a starting point for each person to say, let me understand and dig in deeper. Let me ask my doctor for these kinds of tests. Let me do it myself by getting a wearable like a Lingo or a Stella to look at my sugars. Make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So basically, instead of going to a full deep personalization as you do in your practice of hundreds of biomarkers, you are having a few beans that you can bean the people in that. And that's the beginning of personalization. It's not the best one, but it's better than doing nothing. Makes a lot of sense.
So that reminds me that in the aspect of how I'm drilling down into digital medicine and hopefully providing this through AI, is I know there are 5 key biomarkers that are important for everybody and that I have never seen anybody optimal in those 5 key biomarkers. And doing the studies that I've done over the years, I'm able to say to people, if you get those 5 biomarkers, you can figure out exactly where you have to start for yourself. And so I agree completely with you. I have patients who are investors in Function Health, or they've done all the tests and they're still frustrated because they think they're doing everything right and they can't get there. So it's drilling down into that knowledge base and doing a limited analysis to get you as far as you can go. And that's what I'm hoping the book will provide.
Yeah, I like to say it's not the device, it's the advice. So as you said, you can do Lingo and test 200 biomarker and all of that. At the end of the day, maybe you and me can look at the 200 biomarker and come with the algorithm in our head, but most of people can't. So then you need to connect it together and provide the advice. And absolutely most of the entities that I see in the market cannot do that and basically synthesize the advice. And you spoke about AI, and I think that there is no interview that we can do without AI. So how do you integrate AI into your work?
So it's a work in progress. I think it's going to be a relief if we as clinicians can have a way to automate routine tasks that take so much of our time, but don't leave us free to dig into really working with individuals. I think if we can translate, for example, dialogue into records without the step of writing things up and making sure that is already happening, I believe, and it's out there. You can get it through Zoom. You can get it through other companies as well who's offering that. Taking the grind out of what we do as physicians that is replicable and freeing up time to be creative, I think, and forward thinking will make a difference, particularly in the next 5 to 10 years. If we can transfer ownership of being healthy to each person virtually, and the way, as I mentioned earlier, the way banking works. I can't remember the last time I had to go into a bank. Now, they'll pester you if you have to go into a bank to sign something, but not to deal with your money. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could deal with our health in the same way we deal with money now? And regardless of the level you start, that would be a game changer to me, along with wearables. So I think AI is going to play a huge role in taking some of the automation that we're due for in medicine. It still sometimes feels like the dark ages when you have to fax information to another doctor and they have to gather all this stuff, or even just look at the way reports are given to people in Quest. You can't follow trends in people. A lot of times we do double the amount of testing. I'll share this with you that I did for me and my twin, and the answers come out differently. So we do 2 different tests, for example, cardio IQ and the standard lipids, and we'll find in the same person, the same blood at the same time, 2 different numbers. Or I drew twice the amount of blood in myself, labeled it with my twin sister's name and my name, and the numbers were not alike. So there's human pieces to this that we have to take into account, and following trends and being able to master that in a way that is holistic and systematic and gives us insight is where I think AI is going to play the biggest role.
Yeah, and I agree with you about, I call it the machine variability, that if your one day your glucose is 100 and let's say fasting glucose and another day is 105, you need to know that the variability is 10 units, so it's actually the same. So
and don't sweat it. And we've had people where one day you're between 70 and 80, which is ideal, but another day you're 110. Or we do oral glucose tolerance tests on everybody. And we see people who go with a sugar of over 200 or end with a glucose at 3 hours of 100 and become hypoglycemic. So learning how to eat, learning how to change the way we eat, starting, let's say, with protein, fat, and fiber instead of a carb, can change the way you eat. Doesn't mean you have to give up bread altogether, or find bread that has seeds on it that are gonna synchronize with the carbohydrates and not allow your sugar to go sky high, and then your insulin goes even higher.
Yeah. Any last wisdom that you want to share with our audience before we are wrapping up?
I think that know thyself is probably the best way to think about this, that we can all start by probing a little bit, particularly if we have family that we're in touch with, and ask parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, what are the kinds of things you're dealing with? Sometimes it's secretive, like people don't like to share their weaknesses. And I don't know if you've ever watched Steinfeld, where you go into the medicine cabinet when you visit and you see the drugs people are taking. I think everybody could use that. I hope that my book, which is going to be entitled right now, the working title is Invincible, Defy Your Genetic Density to Live Better Longer. I hope that will help translate outcomes that we've experienced in stopping disease and reversing it for everyone, and reversing biological aging. Because I think if each of us can picture a little bit, just a little bit, about what's around the corner and proactively put in measures to reverse disease, we can stop symptoms and we can live life to the fullest with the joy of living.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Comite, and sharing your pioneering work. For listeners who want to learn more about you, visit comitemd.com and follow a research and update. And don't forget to keep an eye for your upcoming book that I know that it's coming in April 2026, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Little Brown Spark is, and we've gotten offers from other countries, so I'm very excited. We're also on social media, and I'm hoping to increase the followers, so they can find me at Dr. Florence Comite on Instagram and on Twitter as well. And I have a podcast, not as well formed as you, but called Healthy Longevity. So there's a little bit of overlap, but Healthy Longevity with Florence Comite, MD. So I'd love people to follow me there as well and write comments. And I actually have fun on social media. I like answering questions on LinkedIn as well.
That's good. And audience, if you enjoyed today's episode of Longevity by Design, please can follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Leave us a rating and review. It really helps us discover this conversation. And of course, share this episode with anyone passionate about longevity and healthy living. Thank you again for tuning into Longevity by Design, produced by InstaTracker. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much again, Florence, and looking forward to continue the discussion.
Thank you for allowing me to talk about all my life's work. Look forward to learning even more as well, Gil. And I'm going to be following you, so you can bet I already signed up.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by InsideTracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out, using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit insidetracker.com/podcast.